Today's class we are going to discuss Prabhat as one of the major important studios of the studio era in Indian cinema. So first what we'll do, we'll study at length about Prabhat and how why it is important for us, the students of cinema and media studies, with reference to the other major studios of the Indian cinema in that particular period, how Prabhat stood out its difference and everything. And later on we will focus a particular film director V. Shantaram, who started his career with this particular studio called Prabhat, and later after he left Prabhat and he established his own studio. So our today's discussion actually consists of two studies. Basically, on the description of Prabhat, the major important studio of Indian cinema, and one particular director who started his career with Prabhat. So Prabhat, the studio was established in 1931 with 5 self-taught technicians. It is important because other major studios of Indian cinema in this particular period, be it the Bombay Talkies or New Theatres or other, all were like run by the major producers or sponsor or finance they had. Prabhat really lacked that sponsorship or finance. It's only the 5 self-taught technicians like Bishnupad Damle, Said Fatehlalal, Shantaram and 2 other technicians who started Prabhat, but within just 4 or 5 years they established themselves to that scale that it became one of the most important studios in the studio era of Indian cinema. So while we discuss the Prabhat and its function and its pioneering attempt in the Indian cinema, the 2 or 3 important things that we should keep in mind. Firstly, the issues of the influences, like what the majority of the film texts produced by Prabhat, what was the influence behind that, whether it was the westernized filmmaking technique or the indigenous Indian production or indigenous Indian culture and media texts that become a major determinant in the film production. Later we'll come up with the issues of the major genres, the specialized genres, what Prabhat did, its specialization, what was unique to Prabhat. And after that we will discuss might be some of the major important films like Sant Tukaram or Duniya Na Mane or Shantaram Santin's later filmmaking career. So coming up with the idea of the influences of the films that Prabhat made, we also have to remember that Prabhat and other important studios, when they function in the history of Indian cinema, it was a crucial juncture in the overall history of Indian cinema, because 1930s to 1950s is a period when from the earlier filmmaking technology or technique, Indian cinema is going through a more professional approach. So the period itself and the studio themselves who acted as the major player of this particular period, they acted themselves as a bridging paradigm, as a bridging platform between these 2 decades. So when we'll study Prabhat or Bombay Talkies or New Theatres, we'll find both the tendencies, some of the tendencies of the early cinema period and also some of the other later decades that will appear in later historical moments. So when we discuss the major influences or the majority of the influences that acted on the famous films or the milestones, we can say, like films like Sant Tukaram or Kunku or Admi or Manus, these kinds of film. So both this technique, both this Western editing stylization, the modernist filmmaking technique of Europe was important, influential, and on the other hand also the indigenous Indian tradition, cultural tradition, the literary text tradition, the theatre tradition played an important role. Like in case of Prabhat or in the direction of V. Shantaram, the one of the particular Marathi theatre tradition that is called the Sangeet Natak. What happened in Sangeet Natak or the particular theatre genre, both the music and the prose played an important role while communicating with its audience. So Sangeet Natak became a dominant form, a dominant template, we can say, in case of Prabhat and his filmmaking templates, because Sangeet Natak has this important or interesting tendency. While it adapts the story from the mythological or the history or epic, it generally also comments on the contemporary social scenario of India. So Prabhat also did a similar thing with his saint films or mythological films. Whenever it adapts a particular mythological text, it also comments on the contemporary situation, whether it's a pre-independence movement or the political situation or the social situation, and in this way it tried to generate a kind of social awareness. What is important for Prabhat because what is different in Prabhat and what made this particular film production studio unique from Bombay Talkies or new theatres, the mostly Prabhat focused on the socially relevant issues, the social films. It raised the issues like caste discrimination, the class discrimination, the oppression of women, and all these things quite radically and quite highlighted it quite strongly. That was not so much evident in other studios of this particular era. So along with this influence of Sangeet Natak, this particular Marathi theatric tradition, also the modernist technique had an important role in shaping up the film production of Prabhat studio. Particularly a particular film movement called the Expressionist movement, the German Expressionist movement. Prabhat borrowed in many cases, in many instances, the lighting technique or the camera technique from this modernist film movement that took place in 1920s Europe, mostly in Germany and some other countries.
माझी मंगळाई आहे तशी तिच्या अंगाराचा गुण बरं काही माझ्या आई मंगळाई माझ्या पोरासनी सुखी ठेव ग बाई.
So both this heterogeneity of form is something important to focus on while we are discussing a particular studio productions like Prabhat. So when we focus on the genre or the important genre that that makes Prabhat so specific, so unique in its time. So one of the relevant and the most important genre would be the saint film. Prabhat, almost we can call Prabhat the pioneer in this field of producing and promoting the saint film. So Prabhat based his story mostly on the Bhakti age saints and narrates his story through this medium of cinema. And both the early cinema iconicity and also this after arrival of talkie, the technique of the new narrative and the new narrative logistics played an important role. Like in a film like Sant Tukaram, the realism also played an important role in mapping the space, film space, in mapping the characterization, everything.
घरात बायका पोर ओरडते तुमच्या नावानं आणि तुम्ही ओरडताय फक्त दुसऱ्याच्या नावानं. पोटाची तरी सुदबुद आहे का नाही?
So just to go back to the particular concept of iconicity what I have just mentioned, it's important for us to actually understand the iconicity in Indian cinema is actually referred to a different film language per se from the Western filmmaking technique in the Europe or in America. Like in early Indian cinema by Dadasaheb Phalke and some other early Indian silent film, the iconicity what happened, the film space, the icon or the central figure, mostly the deities or the gods and goddesses, it takes the central position, and not the film is not so much about the narrative progression or not so much about offering the voyeuristic pleasure that was usual in a Western filmmaking technique. So Prabhat's saint film also many way borrowed this tendency or technique of iconicity from the early Indian cinema, but along with it Prabhat studio production also mixed them with the Western technique of editing and cinematography and also the different kinds of narrative logic. So the one of the most important filmmaking genres of saint film that Prabhat was pioneer in the field, we can see both play of both this technique and both these influences of the Western filmmaking technique and also the indigenous Indian cultural text and its tradition. So along with the Sangeet Natak tradition or Sangeet Natak genre, the contemporary Marathi literature also played an important role. Well, Prabhat is producing the socials like Duniya Na Mane, Kunku or Manus Admi, this series of film. The films mostly were centered around women characters who were asking the question to the patriarchal society, and the film raised serious questions in the issues of the oppression of the women. This is also something significant because the contemporary studios or the contemporary film takes that were not so much vocal about the issues of caste discrimination or class discrimination or suppose gender discrimination. So Prabhat really stood as a pioneer in this field.
उनका पति बड़ा अमीर मनई है, होशियार है, निर्मला को जाके आवैया है.
अच्छा बा.
So why Prabhat is important? Because Prabhat is important firstly for the stylization that it created a number of milestones, and obviously Sant Tukaram, I am coming again and again to this particular film that was awarded internationally in Venice Film Festival and also across India, and it was like praised by the our local Indian film reviewer. And also these films like Kunku, Duniya Na Mane, Manus and Sejari, they also highlighted the relevant issues of gender oppression, women's liberty, child marriage, the evils of child marriage rather, or the struggle of a prostitute. Like in a film like Manus, this film actually centered around a prostitute and a particular common man who wants to free this particular woman. And famous filmmaker Shyam Benegal actually wrote about this particular film that it was hard to believe that the scenes involving the sex worker Maina and Ganpat Havildar were shot in a studio. From art direction to casting of character actor, from makeup to acting style, Manus attempted to look real in every aspect of it. The music of this film also became phenomenal. The lyrics contained words from 6 Indian languages, and a particular song picturized on Maina became most popular. So again with Prabhat, we are again coming back to the question of language. So 1930s and the studio era and cinema is actually exploring the new avenues of using sound and the new possibilities of sound. So language was a pressing concern, and Prabhat was no exception to that. So many of the film making studios in this period explored the possibility of bilingual film. So be it the new theatre production, also the Prabhat's production, many of the Prabhat's production was bilingual. One was shot in Hindi and the other one is Marathi for the more local regional audience. So coming back to the different generic patterns or the different generic stylization that Prabhat had excelled in this particular period, historical would also be something important to focus on. Like in later period in the Prabhat's studio era or the functioning year of Prabhat, Prabhat made this important film called Ram Shastri. It was an historical narrative adaptation of that, but with a certain kinds of change approach to a particular historical text. So Prabhat did something new which was not so much commonsensical for the other studio-made productions who were working on the historical genre. Actually, Ram Shastri narrates the story of the Peshwa Madhav Rao. He was the Chief Justice, and he struggled for justice and against the royal conspiracy in a particular family, and how he united some other common man and also the rulers of Peshwa to unite against the social evil. So what is important in this particular film, that Urbi Mukhopadhyay, a film scholar who is working on the Prabhat and the Marathi film, she wrote that the film invoked a past that could be easily identified with the contemporary political condition, but unlike others, it never projected the glaring issues of the day in order to generate interest in historical. Emphasizing in conviction in truth that can ultimately triumph in an era of confusion, conspiracy and distrust, the film created in essence a mythical allegory that earned appreciation throughout the country. So also the publicity logic of Ram Shastri is something important, because the publicity posters or the newspaper advertisement, that actually advertisement showed one veiled Hindu woman and one veiled Muslim woman. They are holding each other's hand and they are asking to each other, "Seen Ram Shastri?" and there is the shadows of a temple and a mosque. So as in Ram Shastri and some other historical film genres produced by Prabhat, and also in the mythological and the saint films that was produced by the Prabhat. So both these tendencies, both this tension actually well explored, like Western tendencies of the filmmaking technique and the editing technique and everything, and also the indigenous Indian tradition. So whenever they are adapting the particular Indian myth or a particular period of Indian history, so both these tendencies were actually well played within the film text, and that was shown and captured on screen. Similarly, when they are dealing with a particular saintly character or a mythological character, it's not only about the iconicity or not only about the devotion of deity that were prevalent or so much evident in the early Indian cinema, but Prabhat also advanced the technique of filming the saint film or the deity film. So both the iconicity and both the narrative logic played an interesting role. So Prabhat is important, or Prabhat is interesting rather, in this period of Indian history or the study of the history of Indian cinema, because in Prabhat we can very well read these two tendencies in how the Indian cinema is taking a particular shape within this crucial juncture. So both this Western tendency and the iconicity and the indigenous theatre tradition, the literature tradition, song and dance and everything. Along with Prabhat, we'll also focus on a particular filmmaker who started his career with Prabhat, that is Rajaram Shantaram Vaikudre, or popularly known as V. Shantaram, who started his filmmaking career in Prabhat, but because of some internal feud, he has to leave the filmmaking studio called Prabhat, and he set up his own independent studio called Rajkamal Studio, and he made his films there, and he was active till 1980s, even late 1980s. When you look at the career or the filmmaking career of the V. Shantaram, and along with Prabhat and also separately from Prabhat, so again 2 or 3 important things that we should keep in mind while discussing a particular film figure or filmmaker persona of this particular time period. So mythology and both this Western technique of realism forms takes the shape in the V. Shantaram's film, be it the early period in Manu Sejari or in some later period Janak Janak Payal Baje or Do Aankhein Bada Haath. So that is something that created a kind of individualistic style in the V. Shantaram's filmmaking career. But after he left Prabhat, he made 2 major Indian films. The first one is the Do Aankhein Bada Haath and the second one is the Janak Janak Payal Baje. We are discussing these 2 films separately because these are the 2 films that he made after he left Prabhat. So these 2 films also created new milestone in the Indian cinema because of its film technique, film making style, narrative design and everything. So firstly, the Janak Janak Payal Baje, that was based on a love story between 2 dancers. The film is interesting because the film firstly used a number of dance traditions like Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, Manipuri, Vil dance and several other dance form in India. But the more important part is the different dance tradition or different dance pattern of Indian dance. The film not only used that as a kind of relief or as an imposed part of the song and dance or only as a spectacular part of the cinema, but also along with the narrative logic. So with the dance sequences, the film narrative also moves within a particular direction. It's a rare example in Indian cinema where the different dance form of India can be so well used within a particular film narrative. So also some kind of mythological references and some historical figures that were also referred back during the Janak Janak Payal Baje, like the Radha Krishna romance was in many instances were captured or referred in particular dance sequence, and also when the lovers are uniting or meeting each other, and similarly the Vishwamitra Menaka theme also referred back from time to time. So after Janak Janak Payal Baje, he made another milestone in Indian cinema, that is the Do Aankhein Bada Haath. It was based on an open prison experiment in the princely state of Oudh near Pune. And what happened when the lyricist G.D. Madgulkar narrated the story to Shantaram, the initial response was the film was average. But after a few days, it released, the film became a hit. And Lata Mangeshkar's the famous song "Ae Malik Tere Bande Hum," as we all know, became almost phenomenal not only in India but also in the neighboring countries like Pakistan and some other countries. Ae Malik Tere Bande Hum. This film, Janak Janak Payal Baje, Do Aankhein Bada Haath, and later on Navrang, Pijra, the filmmakers V. Shantaram fully established his own filmmaking style and offered many milestones to the history of Indian cinema. So in brief, Damle, Fatehilal and V. Shantaram and all the other artists in Prabhat, the realism question comes up very strongly with this film production. So whether they are making a particular film on a mythological character or a particular saint or any historiographical period, the Indian atmosphere and the Indian feel was something important that came up in their mind. So that's why they created the film like Sant Tukaram and some other films. They look more real than some particular production that is focusing on a particular contemporary story. And critics like A. Abbas and many of other who compared between the productions of Prabhat and the productions of New Theatre or the Bombay Talkies, they wrote about this feature or the realistic outlook of Prabhat and again, and they highlighted this Prabhat, and this is something that made Prabhat a separate studio and its unique identity in the studio era of Indian cinema. But like other studios of India, like Bombay Talkies, New Theatres, Bharat Lakshmi, Imperial, and some other major important studios of Indian cinema, the Prabhas also came to an end in late 1940s, early 1950s. The major attack came when the Shantaram left the studio for some internal feud during the Ram Shastri, and after leaving of Shantaram, Damle also passed away. So there are kind of internal conflicts and tension that were taking place within the studio, and there are also external factors that were changing the filmmaking scenario not only in Maharashtra film industry but in the overall India. And finally in 1952 the Prabhat Film Company was closed down, and after that the Indian government brought the studio and it established the Film and Television Institute there. And with the demise of Prabhat, Marathi film industry attained a new phase that is obvious, like a passing of these filmmakers and the new closing down of new studio. But what is important for us and why we're discussing Prabhat till now after so many years of the demise of the particular studio, the pioneering attempt of the Prabhat, the genre, the stylization, the new platform that Prabhat created or the Prabhat established becomes still relevant in the Indian cinema, and that is not only confined to the Marathi film industry but also in the overall Indian cinema. Similarly with V. Shantaram and his film masterpieces that he made during his tenure with the Prabhat studio, and also when he independently made the Rajkumal studio and he made films there, he offered some of the great milestones of Indian cinema, and that was influential in the some later generation of filmmaker like Gurudutt, Bimal Roy and some other filmmakers, and that also give a shape to the future of Indian cinema, or the Indian cinema that belong to the future decades. So with this we come to an end with this discussion of the Prabhat, one of the major important studio of the studio era and also one of the finest filmmaker of this particular studio era, V. Shantaram.